have to say, it's one thing that always sticks out to me is before I even got there, John Terry was the captain at the time of England, and John Terry phoned me to say, I'm delighted you've been called up to the squad. I can't wait for you to join up with the lads. I'll meet you at the hotel. And rightly so, when I got there, John Terry was there, met me at the hotel, and I thought that is a real touch of class about sort of helping somebody, especially young and new to the squad, to integrate you in. So that I've got to mention that because it always sticks out in my mind. Obviously, you're at a plush hotel. The first training session we had in that, I think it might have been that afternoon, was just so cool. It was just like you've got the training kit on that you know you're going to be able to keep as well, by the way.
Did you have your own room?
Yes, I did, luckily, yeah. Yeah. And yeah, you get all the gear and the tracksuits and you know you're going to be able to. I've still got loads of it. My dad wears it actually, and you're part of that training, and it's just so cool to be part of it. And you had everybody there because, like you said, other players left before the Trinidad trip, so you had everybody there, all the big names, and that was just really, really cool. And then we were going to train at Old Trafford the next day, sort of match day -1, I think they call it now, at Old Trafford. And as you can imagine, I was so excited to be first of all training at Old Trafford was cool with England, that feeling, and I'd sort of been not by Steve McLaren, but I think it was Stuart Pearce who was part of had just kind of given me an inkling of make sure you're ready. I think basically telling me I was going to be starting the next day against Greece, and so again went into the training session as you normally would do. The England training was by far the most intense, the best quality, the fastest training I was ever involved in. It was just awesome. It was, you had to be so sharp in every aspect, right from when you stepped out till the end of the training sessions, because if you weren't, you would be found out pretty quickly, because these players are the best in the country, and the level was so high. So the intensity of training was pretty high. I think we were playing a sort of team game where you get it to the end and that's you scoring as such, and then rotate round. And all I remember is just the ball being there. I tried to toe it away, the tackle, the noise of my ankle breaking, and then that obviously feeling of falling down. It wasn't necessarily the pain as such, it more kind of spasms into position, if that makes sense. And I just remember I think I was on my sort of hands and knees as I sort of rolled over, and I must have let out some sort of, not a scream, more like a shout of anger almost.
Yeah.
That something had happened. Because I remember, I think John Terry spoke about that. But then that's all a bit of a blur, if I'm honest. I don't remember a lot about then what happened and how long that took from that moment to the physios being there, the stretcher coming out. Obviously, all the players and everything would have come around to sort of console me. But I knew at that moment, I knew my ankle was broke. I knew that was it. But I guess I was trying to keep it together probably at that point. When you're in front of everybody. Gary Lewin was the physio at the time. They got the stretcher out. There was no way I was going to be able to sort of walk in. So they got me on that and sort of took me into the dressing room, and training would have continued at that point. It's only then once I got into the dressing room, I just broke down, burst into tears, sort of Gary up, sort of give me a hug almost and tried to console me, because it wasn't even the ankle break that was upsetting me. It was that you think you're only going to get one chance with England, and that was in my head. I just thought, that's it. That's my chance gone. It's never going to happen ever again. Even though at the time my thoughts, a few minutes later, 10 minutes, 15 minutes later, was of, these things happen. You can come back, and it was still, well, you only get one England chance and it's gone. And that was why I think I was so upset. And then it was off to the hospital to get X-rays, etc. But it's not like I needed that. I knew it was broken. I knew my chance had gone. I just couldn't believe that. Why was it me? Why did it have to happen to me the day before you're meant to make your England debut, the biggest thing that can happen to you at that time as a footballer? Why did I have to have that kind of bad luck? And that's what I struggled with initially.
How did you feel like, the aftermath? Obviously you were, you didn't know how serious the injury this was going to be in terms of your career, but did you feel like the FA did their bit in terms of the care that they gave you afterwards? Did you feel like there was any support from the players or Steve McLaren after the injury?
Yeah, well, I went to the hospital and Gary was brilliant. He came with me and sat through everything and tried to explain everything the best he could. And then I went back to the hotel, which was the Lowry, I think it was, because there's a picture of me going up the stairs. I've got a few pictures where I'm on crutches in a sort of cast, going up it's still in my training kit, going up the stairs back into the hotel. And obviously, players came and were great. But what can you say as a player at the time? You go, you console, but again, they've got a game the next day, and it's very, very difficult. So I certainly felt like there was people around me, but you couldn't feel more alone if you tried. Even though there's loads of people there, you still feel alone because it's happening to you, and it's your opportunity that's going to be missed. And I was really struggling with that kind of mindset at the time. I just wanted to go. I didn't want to go back to the hotel. I just wanted to go home almost at the time. But I knew then I was going to be transported from there to make a decision as to where I was going to go to get the surgery done and all of that. So I wanted to go home at that point and kind of curl up and hope that I woke up and it hadn't happened.
I think it's something that has clearly, for a lot of people, defines your career and stands out from your career, is that you had to retire when you were still so young, not even in your prime, before your prime. Your last game, you hadn't yet turned 25, and this injury was, really the big reason for it and the impact that it had on your ankle. I think for me, one of the most astonishing things, given the damage that it did, is that we've just talked about you playing for England 18 months later, less than 18 months later, and in between breaking your ankle and in between representing England, you went through the rehabilitation, you got back on the pitch, you scored 10 Premier League goals for West Ham, and you earned your spot back in that England squad. That period to me is remarkable. How were you physically able to do that, given that the ankle really gave up on you so quickly?
I'm not sure how I got through it, if I'm honest. I think at the time, I remember, seeking advice, and that type of injury was, 4-5 months. Because I remember thinking, okay, it's bad, but I'll be back after Christmas. And sadly for me, it was 15 months later, not 5, because of this kind of severity of the damage that was done. I think me physically, I'm a big guy, there's a lot of weight going through the ankle. I'm quite a stiff jointed person, which didn't help in terms of having that suppleness of an ankle joint to get me through. So I had to go back in to have another surgery. And it's the darkest time as a footballer is when you can't be involved and having to go in every day. And you have this rush of players coming in, having a laugh, getting their strap-ins done, a bit of massage, everything's such a great mood. Then they leave and it's like a big cloud comes over and you've got to spend the rest of the day peeking outside to the grass while you're doing calf raises for the 1,000th time to try and get some calf muscle back. And I ended up not doing the rehab at the club. I went outside and did it with just a separate physio because I couldn't cope almost with being at the training ground. But honestly, I worked so hard. I was so resilient mentally to get through it. And my reward at the end of it was that England cap. and I know it was just the one. I know it was only 45 minutes, but it meant everything to me because of what I'd had to go through to get it, to gain it, to almost deserve it. So it meant a lot to me. And things that people maybe don't understand is when you have these massive injuries is what it takes from you. So the player that I was in that first squad was not the player I was when I came back to the second squad. I know there was a different manager and different players as well, but I was always very good at striking the ball with my left foot. I couldn't do that anymore. I had to curl every single shot with my left foot from then on. I was great in the air because you have a favoured foot that you jump off. Well, my favourite foot was the one that didn't work very well anymore, so I had to jump two-footed for forevermore. So there was things that were taken away, which again makes me really proud that I was almost able just to fight my way back to a position to gain that England cap, which is why it'll always be so special to me.
I think we as football fans, it's really easy for us to take for granted players getting injured and then coming back. When a player gets injured, we immediately think, well, how long are they going to be out for? Is it 2 months, 3 months? Is it the rest of the season? Especially these days, even if it's an ACL or an Achilles, we think, okay, that's going to be out for a year or 9 months, but they'll be back. And then when they're back, we expect you to just be the same player that you were before. And anyone listening who's had an injury in whether they're playing football or whether they're running or whatever it might be, these little things, they take their toll on you. Like, and that's just us being amateurs. Like, you're at the elite end of the game, and your body has been changed forever by this injury and by this surgery. And it's really interesting and sad, but very interesting to hear the fact that you felt you were unable to strike the ball the same way that you could before, and that is obviously going to make a massive difference to you when the margins are that fine.
Yeah, exactly. Which, again, obviously I didn't then carry on that much longer after that period, but I did wonder how it would affect my career. You talk about at that highest level when you go through on goal in a big moment, and you want to strike it, and probably the best way to score is to strike it, and you can't. You've got to curl it. That's probably going to have a damaging effect on certain scenarios in
it's playing on your mind as well.
Of course, yeah. It was very, very difficult, but ultimately I was still doing the thing I loved, and you appreciate it so much more when you've been through a period where you're not playing or you're worried about that you'll ever get back. So there's also that side of things, and I always sort of was very good at sort of separating the kind of fantasy from reality, because playing for England is a fantasy. It is. Some of us are so lucky to get to live it, but it's a fantasy, isn't it? Where you're on a plane, you're in Trinidad and Tobago with David Beckham and Rio and Gerrard and the England squad, and there's
Joe Lewis.
Yeah, Joe Lewis, of course. And there's thousands of people sort of following you everywhere. That's not real. That's a fantasy, and the reality is the day-to-day stuff and the rehab and the reality of how you've got to deal with things mentally. And I've always been really good at having that separation of what's real and what's a fantasy. And being with England was without a doubt a fantasy to me.
It feels like you're painting an honest picture about the player that you were when you came back, and maybe not as dynamic and not able to shoot with as much power with your left foot. But as I mentioned, 10 league goals in 07-08 after recovery, including 5 in the last 8 games of the season. Very famous bicycle kick at Old Trafford among them. That England cap as well. I mean, at that time, did you have an idea that there was a potential issue coming down the line? Did you understand that the ankle could just give up on you? Had you been advised, this might curtail your career, or did that come as a bit of a hammer blow, after those goals, after the England call-up and towards the start of that next season?
Yeah, I didn't know, because I was actually getting better, hence probably why my performances and goals tally improved as the season went on, because I was getting better all the time. It was loosening off the ankle. I was feeling more comfortable day to day. I wasn't maybe having to do as much before and after training to maintain my ankle, and things were looking up. And I ultimately got picked for an England squad. So at that point, you're not thinking that your career is going to end a few months down the line. I felt really comfortable. I knew that I would have a career where I would have to manage it, and that it might maybe shorten my career slightly at the back end. But I just think the acceleration of the deterioration of my ankle was so big over that summer then and the next pre-season, that maybe without constantly having scans, which you wouldn't have necessarily done because I felt comfortable, we weren't to know. It was only then, once I started that next season, that the realisation that my ankle was more like an 80-year-old's ankle than a prime athletic Premier League football's ankle. So it was never ever going to be a case of being able to carry on at the elite level. As we've talked about, you've got to be at your absolute peak to even be there, let alone thrive at that level. So it was definitely not on my mind, that's for sure.
I saw a clip in preparation for this. I saw a clip of you talking about this situation, and once you've had the relapse of the injury, which I think is in the first training session when Zola comes in at West Ham, it gets to a point where it looks like the writing's on the wall, and it seems like you almost wanted the end to come. You wanted that finality of like, look, let me retire and move on. When that moment came, there must have maybe been a bit of a release, like there can be sometimes in those situations when one thing ends, another, a dark period maybe is having a full stop put on it. But I'm interested in the time after that. Were there moments once you'd retired and you had moved away from the game, that must have been really challenging mentally to deal with the aftermath of looking back at a career that wasn't fulfilled even in the slightest?
Yeah, incredibly difficult, and probably quite normal though to feel like that. It was difficult right at the end. I tried everything I could to get back. I'd had multiple surgeries and steroid injections, you name it. I'd tried it to try and get back, and it was interesting actually. Just to touch on England, on those few games that I played the next season, I would have got called up for that next squad, but I took a free kick and got cramp in my calf. And they thought I was injured, and so didn't pick me for the next England squad. So I probably would have got another cap if it wasn't for the doctor saying he's struggling a bit, but it was just cramp. But then, towards the end of me trying to get fit, that Zola training session where, we were warming up round and there was this noise kept being made, this sort of clicking noise, and Kieran Dyer went to me, "Can anyone else hear that?" And he went, "Is that you?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's me." And then once we started the session, I lasted about 10 minutes and then I was done. And I just remember, because I knew at that point, if I couldn't train, it was going to be over. So that was almost like my final attempt at trying to train. And Scott Parker was at the club at the time, and I was desperate to cry as I was just about to walk off. And he kind of like grabbed me and was sort of, took me and said, "Don't do it here. Let's go," and took me sort of in towards and so I didn't cry in front of everybody. I sort of went away and and did it because of Scott Parker. Scott Parker wouldn't let me cry. That's what type of guy he is.
It's particularly funny because as he has become older, become a manager and mellowed, he's quite quick to tears. I've seen a few clips of him addressing his squad. He's fighting back the tears. They're all having a laugh about, oh, Gaffer's crying again. He's embraced the fact that men can cry. Men should cry. It can be very good for you to let it out. How much do you, we and fans, I think, like to pretend like the late 2000s is about 3 years ago, but it's quite a long time ago now, and you've done so much since your football career, including really, really honing your golf game. But how much have you, or do you let your mind wander? You said you watched the Trinidad game back a couple of years ago. I've seen a great clip of you watching your old goals, your peak Barclays era goals with your two sons who were too young to remember it. From an England point of view, you scored 100 career goals, age 24, which is a hell of a return. It's not just the injuries that you'd battled, but actually on a footballing level, you'd come through at Crewe Alex, a famous youth academy, an amazing club for developing young players, but not an elite club. And you'd worked your way up through the Football League with Crewe and then Norwich, and kept scoring goals when you got to West Ham. I think your goals per minute is best in the Premier League compared to the second tier and the third tier. So you really were on and up. The 2010 World Cup is what I'm circling here. If you managed to recover and the ankle injury hadn't been so severe, England strikers of that World Cup were Rooney, Crouch, Defoe, and an Emil Heskey, who, this is a long time after 2001 beating Germany in the Olympiastadion. Heskey's in his early 30s at that point. Do you look at that squad and think, yeah, on merit, had I avoided, had Sean Wright-Phillips not made that tackle, or whatever the case may be, I'd have been at that 2010 World Cup, and maybe England would have scored more than 3 goals in the 4 games that they scored in the tournament.
Yes, I do. I do think I would have been there. I think certainly Capello early on as well spoke to me about how he saw my relationship with Wayne Rooney and how that would work, and how he saw us two as a sort of partnership, and maybe Crouchy and Defoe as a partnership. So I think I would have had a great chance. And as you said, I was only 24. I'd by no means reached my peak. I'd only had a few years in the Premier League, really, in terms of learning and developing at that level. So I think over the coming years, I'd have got much better. I'd have been more clinical, and I'd have sort of honed what I was as a striker. And I think no doubt I would have been on the plane. But it's a bit like everything else after football. And especially because of my job, because I'm in football. So there's not many days that go by where I don't think about, what could have been for me, and how amazing the industry is, and how lucky I was to be part of it, and all those natural feelings that you're meant to have, I think, when you finish, which is bitterness towards the other players that get to do it and get to continue to have long England careers after I've retired and continue to play the game. I mean, James Milner's still going. I was playing with him. It's that's so that bitterness is still there towards James Milner if he's listening.
Oh my God, that's unbelievable.
But that's totally normal. It's a normal feeling to have when something's taken away from you sort of so cruelly, is to have those feelings. And the biggest and the hardest one is the what ifs, because I'd have loved to have had the full career to see where I could have got to, what I could have achieved, how many goals I could have scored, what type of goals I could have scored, what I missed out on. That's always going to be the hardest thing to deal with, but it's fine because I've got that sense of fantasy and reality, and that was a fantasy world that I was part of. And reality's pretty good. Do you know what I mean? Getting to play golf with you two at times on these splendid golf courses that we do, it's not half bad.
It's an incredible thing to use as a way to balance out some of the significant misfortune that you suffered professionally. But no, it's amazing to hear you talk about it like that.
Thank you very much for joining us on this latest episode of Capped and having a wander down memory lane. I think I can speak for all England fans in saying that we wish we had seen you more in an England shirt, and we wish we had seen you playing up front for England in 2010 and how different it could have been. But thank you very much, again, for taking the time.
It's a pleasure. It's always nice to walk down memory lane and remember those really proud moments for myself.
It could have been Dean Ashton looking down the lens and going, "Nice to see your own fans booing you."